In this video, we will go over some of the common errors that you may encounter in Tableau, especially if you're just getting started with Tableau, and I will show you some ways you can solve or troubleshoot them. I'll see you in a bit. This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community for creative and curious people. Recently, I've rekindled my fascination with drawing and art. My drawing skills are very elementary, probably very close to non-existent. I can draw stick figures, but that's about it. But in the last month, somehow I found myself doodling more and fascinated with colors and lines and seeing how beautiful they can become. And with each sketch or doodle, I've felt a sense of peace and enjoyment. With this newfound enjoyment, I thought perhaps maybe I should put some more time in and improve my stick figures. Luckily, Skillshare has many courses on arts and graphics and illustration. And many of the lessons are under an hour, something I can easily squeeze in, even on a busy day. If you want to reawaken that inner child in you who just wants to draw the world, and if you want to do it a little bit more than just stick figures, try Skillshare. The first 1,000 people to use the link in the description below will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Happy drawing! So the first error we're going to tackle is the problem connecting to the data source. Let me start by demonstrating how we typically connect to an Excel file. This is an example Excel file with a single tab and no named ranges. When we connect to this file in Tableau, we're not going to see any errors. So drag it over. We can see that there is a single tab and there are no named ranges. Therefore, Tableau is connecting to this right away. So even if we don't drag this over to this main screen, when we go over to the worksheet view, all of the fields are readily available to be used. However, the experience is going to be a little bit different when you have multiple tabs or multiple named ranges. For example, this Excel file has 3 tabs as well as 3 named ranges. We can see the named range when we go to Formulas, Name Manager. We can see in here that there are 3 ranges that have names within Excel. Those are going to be recognized within Tableau as well. When we connect to this Excel file in Tableau, let's drag this over. We can see all the tabs and all the named ranges are listed under Sheets. However, if we go directly to Sheet 1 without dragging any of these tables in, this is when we're going to see that error. Therefore, to solve this issue we simply need to go back to our data source and drag the tables that we want to use within our worksheet. So back to the data source, perhaps we want to use orders. Let's drag it over. And now when we go to Sheet 1, we can see that the error has disappeared and we can start using all the fields from this table. This second error typically appears when the field names from our original data source have changed. We can see the error appear in multiple different places. For example, in the sidebar, you're going to get an exclamation mark that tells you that field does not exist anymore. Now, if we have already used this field somewhere in our view, we're also going to get this red pill that tells us this field doesn't exist. So let's demonstrate how this can happen and how we can solve this issue. For example, in here, I have a live connection to the Superstore dataset, and I do have a chart in here that uses subcategory. For example, if there was a need to adjust or change the field names and we change it in our data source, we are going to see these issues back in Tableau. For example, in here, I'm simply going to remove that dash in subcategory. So let's remove this, save, and let's go back to Tableau. In Tableau, the error will not show up right away. We're going to need to refresh our data source. So we can right-click on this sample Superstore, right-click, refresh. Now we're starting to see the error. So how do we solve this issue? The good thing is we don't need to redo all of our work. We simply need to replace what's called references. So in this case, right-click on the field that has the error or simply click on this drop-down. There's an option for Replace References. And once we click that, we simply need to point to the new field. So replace all references to subcategory. Remember, that's the old field name, and the new field name is the one that has no dashes. So we simply need to select that. And once we select, click OK. All the views are now working correctly. For this third case, it's really more of a clarification rather than an error. Live connection in Tableau does not equate to real-time reporting. It means that when we add or change records, we won't automatically see those in Tableau. We can see in Tableau's documentation that the specific fields queried are defined when the connection is initially created, so in initial connection. We still need to refresh the data source to see any of the updates. This is very similar to what we've seen in the second use case. Here is an example. This worksheet has a live connection to the sample Superstore dataset that comes with your installation of Tableau. Let's go back to the data source and let's pretend we need to adjust one of these subcategory values. So instead of bookcases, maybe this one needs to be the bookcases super awesome. And let's save this. When we go back to Tableau, even though this is a live connection, it doesn't see bookcases super awesome. We still need to go to the data source and then refresh it. So in here, right-click on the data source and then refresh. It's only after refreshing that we see the new values in our data source. You may or may not encounter this next error. This is very specific to creating a map in Tableau. There may be times that when we double-click on a geospatial field in Tableau, we get an empty map. A geospatial field is the one that has the globe icon right beside it, and there's a few ways we can resolve this issue. However, before we do that, we need to remember that certain place names, whether it's city or state or postal codes, some of them are not going to be unique throughout the world. And that is important to note when we are troubleshooting this error. And as a trivia, did you know that there are 31 Alexandrias in the world? There are 12 countries in the world that have the place called Alexandria. So I have an empty worksheet right now. I'm going to double click on this state field and notice that in the state field, there is a globe icon right beside it because state is a standard location field name. When I double click this, Tableau will bring over latitude and longitude to our columns and row shelves. However, I still have an empty map. Now, the first way to solve this is to add additional information so that Tableau knows exactly which place we want to map. And in this case, I do have the country and region field. I can simply add that to the detail, and this will enable Tableau to pinpoint exactly which state place we are referring to. So let's drag country region onto detail, and this has now provided Tableau enough information to map these accurately. Let's undo this. A second way to resolve this is to click on the indicator. So right now it says 49 unknown. When I click the indicator, we can edit the locations from here. And in my case, I am getting an error because my regional settings is set to Canada. But all of these states, they don't exist in Canada. So I simply need to make an adjustment. In here, when I click on country region, again, I have a couple of options. I can either set this to United States, or I can also tell Tableau to derive the country from the field. So as an example, I can set this to United States. And click OK. I'm going to undo this a third time. A third way you can correct the data is by going to the map menu at the very top. When you go to the map menu, you can edit the locations from here as well, so you don't have to rely on the indicator. So when we edit the locations, we are brought back to the same window that we had when we clicked on the indicator. And in here, we can decide whether we want to fix the country information or set this to a specific field. And click OK. There can be many errors that occur with calculated fields. Here's a common example. The plus operator is what we consider as an overloaded operator. What it means is it can perform a different operation depending on the values that we use with it. If we use it with numbers, it will add those numbers. If we use it with strings or text, it will concatenate those strings, meaning it's going to append the strings together. However, it doesn't know what to do when we use it with a string and a number. In this case, we're going to need to change the data type of one of the values, and we can do this with what we call typecasting. In here, we can see that we are having some issues because customer ID is text and row ID is a number. So if we want this to work, we need to convert customer ID into a numeric value so that we're adding two numbers together, or we can convert row ID into a string so that we can combine these two strings together. But either way, the types have to be the same. In this case, customer ID is not something that we can easily translate into a meaningful number. If we describe this on the dropdown, click on Describe, we can see that the values are alphanumeric. Let us explore our type conversion functions. Let's expand the function list. So on the dropdown, type conversion, and these are the functions we can use to convert one data type into another within our calculated fields. In our case, we need to use the str function. We are going to convert our row ID into a string so that we can easily append that with our customer ID. So in here, we are going to use the function str. We're going to put that around our row ID. And we can see that we have resolved that issue. The calculation is now valid. And now this is a string. We add that to another string. And what we're going to get is essentially a longer string or a concatenated string. This is probably one of the most common errors that many of us encounter. There are functions in Tableau that require that the granularity of the values we use inside an expression are the same. Granularity means what the numbers represent. In this example, profit is what we call at the row level granularity. And sales is at a group level granularity. If we try to visualize that, when we say profit and it's at the row level, it means we're trying to target each individual profit at the line level from our data source. However, when we talk about group level, it means we are targeting a slightly different granularity. So in this case, it might be at the order ID level, in which case it has to be the sum of these two profits or these two sales. Now we can see the discrepancy. Are we targeting one value or are we targeting two values? Here's another example. If we take a look at this particular order ID, at row level, we're looking at 8 values. At group level, if we're grouping this by order ID, we're really looking at just one value. So again, there's the discrepancy. So to resolve this, we just need to make sure that they're both either at the row level or at the group level. So for example, if we take away sum and only leave profit divided by sales, then the error disappears. But we also have to ask the question if this is logically correct. Just because the syntax is correct may not necessarily mean that the answers we're getting are correct. Our other option is to make them both at group level. So for example, enclose both of them in sum, and the error also disappears. And as a note, when we are looking for ratio, we typically want grouped expressions for both dividend and divisor. This next one is simple but easy to miss. When we are using if statements in our calculated fields, it must always have an end clause. So in this case, all we need to do is just make sure that whenever we type in if, there is a corresponding end clause. And that solves the issue. This next one is also related to calculated fields. It's also simple, but it's also very, very easy to miss. And sometimes it's also hard to troubleshoot. Right now, we are getting an error and it's telling us there is an unterminated string. Now what this means is we have started a string somewhere using a double quote or a single quote, and we did not close it. So there needs to be a pair that closes the double quotes or another one that closes the single quote. In this case, we are seeing the red squiggly line right there, and it is because we forgot the double quote on West. Therefore, it considers the rest of the expression until it reaches the second double quote as part of this whole string. And Tableau also considers this second double quote as the start of another one, which we did not close. So to solve this issue, we simply need to make sure we have our closing double quotes and the error goes away. This next one, I have encountered it when I was trying to use parameter values as argument to some of the date functions. When I tried to convert the parameter value into lowercase and passed that as an argument, this is the error that I got. Argument 1 to the datepart function must be a string literal. It means we can't simply pass any kind of string. It has to be a string or constant literal. And that is what the documentation says. The date part values, or the arguments that we're passing, they have to be constant strings, not just simply any string, but a constant string. So this is my date parameter. It is a string, and I have two values. Notice in here that the value and the display as are the same. They're both camel capped, meaning you have an uppercase character and then followed by lowercase characters. The values in this parameter, though, are considered string literals. So in my calculated field, I'm going to get an error. So let's open this up. So to solve this issue is we cannot pass our parameter value into another function that returns a string, which means the actual values have to be exactly the same values that are expected by this function. So going back to our parameter, so in the drop-down, edit our parameter. So in this case, we're simply going to change the values to all lowercase because that is what is expected by the date functions. So in here, lowercase year, lowercase month, click OK. And in our calculation, we're simply going to remove this function called lower, and this solves the issue. Date formats can be a little bit problematic. There are a few things that can affect dates. It could be your regional settings, it could be Tableau's default date setting, it could be the format of the field that you're using in your data source. In this example, I have a date field that uses the following format: 2-digit date, 2-digit month, 2-digit year. When we connect to this in Tableau, because of my regional settings, it is being interpreted wrong. For example, the first one is meant to be January 1st, 2021. However, in Tableau, it becomes January 21st, 2001. So how do we troubleshoot this? We can troubleshoot this using calculated fields. We can bring this over as a string. And from here, we can create a calculated field that uses the date parse function that uses the format that it's coded in. So the format that we need for our date parse function is going to be day, which is 2 small d's. We also need month, which is 2 capital M's. And we also have year, which is 2 lowercase y's. Let's try this out. So on the drop down in the sidebar, let's create a calculated field. Let's call this date. We will use the function date parse. And remember our format, it's going to be 2 lowercase d's, dash 2 uppercase m's, dash 2 lowercase y's, and then we can pass in our field. And let's check our values. Let's display our original string. Let's also display the new date. Let's right-click drag the new field, display discrete date. Let's just change the format so we can easily see the values. So on the drop-down, format, let's display this as the full month. January 1st, 2021, that's what we're getting. January 1st, 2022, that's what we're getting. February 1st, 2022, and February 25, 2022. Type mismatches can also happen when we use calculations to relate or join different tables. In this example, we are getting some errors because one of the fields is text and another field is a date. Now, this could be any type mismatch. It could be an integer and a string, a float and a string, a float and an integer. So we just need to make sure that the fields we are relating or using as join fields have the same data types. For this example, in addition to changing the data types, we're also going to use date parse to make sure that we have the correct results when we are relating these tables. So first things first, make them both as strings. Now, even though the error went away, we want to make sure that we are relating this using the correct values. In this case, we do have a format mismatch as well, and we are going to use date parse to make sure that we have the same format for both dates in 2 different files. So for the first one, edit the calculation. It's going to be date parse, the format, which is day, month, year, put a comma, and close the parentheses. Click OK. We'll do the second one. So on the drop-down, edit the calculation, date parse. The format will be month first. So double quote, month, day, year, comma, and then close the parentheses. And now the type mismatch has been resolved. This final one is more of a logic error. If, for example, we miss that we need to join using multiple fields, we will end up with incorrect values even though the join seems to be working. In this example, we can see that only 3 items were returned. 2 of one item, another 2, and then a 7 for a total of 11. Let's connect to these files in Tableau and then join them. Note that only order ID is the common field name between the 2 tables. However, there is a second field that is common between these 2. Row ID on orders and row line ID on returns. But because they have different field names, Tableau will not automatically join using those fields. So here we are in Tableau. Let's drag over orders. And in here, we're going to use joins. It is a physical operation, and we need to double click on this logical table first before we can do a join. So double click, and let's drag returns now. Notice that Tableau used order ID, which is the common field name between the 2, to join these 2 different tables. Let's go to the worksheet, and just as a check, let's see how many in total quantity did we return. So let's scroll down. Let's drag returned quantity onto text, and we can see that this is incorrect. We have a total of 11, yet we are returning 55. So what we need to do is to simply add the row ID as a matching field. So click on the Venn diagram. We're going to add a new join clause. It's going to be row ID should be equivalent to the row line ID. And once we have this, let's close this first, close that. When we go to sheet 1, we are now getting the correct results. That's it. I hope you found this video useful. Better yet, I hope there's something here that will save you some time in the future when you're troubleshooting Tableau. Have you encountered other errors that might be good to tackle in a future video? Please let me know in the comments below. Thank you again for your time. I appreciate it, and see you again next time.